You're watching San Diego's #1 source for news. This is Local 8 News at 6.
Well, it's estimated only 6% of workers love their jobs. Also, nearly half of workers experience job burnout brought on by stress. Scott Hunter is hoping to change that with his new book, Making Work Work. He joins us now to talk about it. Scott, thanks so much for being here with us this morning.
My pleasure.
It's startling to hear that only 6% of Americans love their job.
Yeah, and what's even more alarming is 83% of them say they hate their jobs. Could you believe that?
Why is that?
Well, I've actually been thinking about it. There's a lot of reasons why, but probably the most significant reason is that people thrive on relationships.
Inside the workplace?
Well, people thrive on relationships. I mean, that's what makes life wonderful for us. And relationships at work can be really toxic. You know, for example, if you and I work together, sooner or later you'd have expectations of me, I have expectations of you. Predictably, we're going to end up being disappointed. Are we going to talk about that most likely? Probably not. You know, so here's what ends up happening. I take my disappointment of you and I stick it over here in this little file. And guess what happens to the file? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Have you ever been in a situation where you said or did something and somebody exploded?
Oh,
and
yeah.
their explosion was totally inappropriate to what happened? You know, we call that file emptying time. See? So people don't know how to be in relationship. You go into some companies and the tension is so thick, it's like people learn to be polite with each other.
Would you say it's more so office politics?
Well, that's right. That's where politics come in. You know, you and I start, well, what are we going to do with that person over there? And people start gossiping and complaining with each other behind everyone's back, and before you know it, the sense of team goes out the window.
So how do you make it work?
Well, people have got to learn 3 things. If they would learn these 3 things, I promise you it would be dramatically different. Number 1, you have to learn to talk to the person who you have an upset with, to them.
Okay.
You have to talk directly, not to somebody else. You have to talk to them. Number 2, you have to learn to speak appropriately. And number 3, you have to learn to listen when someone comes to speak to you.
And when you say listen appropriately, that's always taking in what somebody says in a constructive way versus them just taking it as a form of criticism.
Yeah, if I walked over to you and said, you know, I have something I need to say to you, what's your first reaction?
Somebody gets defensive.
Yeah,
exactly.
So what we teach people is, no, you've got to get beyond that. You've got to be able to say, oh, good. You know, absolutely. And then get over with you and listen with compassion to what you have to say.
Well, Scott, something to think about as folks head out to the door to work this
Absolutely.
morning.
Start to think about what's going on in their job and go talk about it.
Well, thanks so much for coming in. We
it's
appreciate
my pleasure.
that. And Scott will be signing copies of his book today at noon at the Borders downtown. It's located at 668 6th Avenue. He'll also be at the Borders in Carmel Mountain Ranch on Wednesday, March 24th at 9 o'clock in the morning. That is located at 11160 Rancho Carmel Drive.